On February the 27th, 2019, United States time, Michael Cohen, the former lawyer of Donald Trump, who in 2018 pleaded guilty to lying to Congress about Donald Trump's ties to Russia and about Donald Trump's hush money payment to porn star or adult erotic film star Stormy Daniels or Stephanie Clifford, and who faces already a jail term. He scathingly attacked his former client, of course not the only client, calling him a liar, a conman, and a cheat. While he admitted lying, he claimed that he is not a liar. I assume by that he meant not a habitual liar. While then Trump has been caught, according to former Michigan Governor Democrat Jennifer Granholm, in over 8,000 lies, according to the Washington Post's fact checker. Or in any case, it can be said that Trump has lied many times or repeated certain lies, for example, about the border wall and about, for example, fraud in the US presidential elections of 2016, despite the fact that he won, and so forth, and about the Mexican immigrants being largely or mostly criminals, such as drug addicts and prostitutes, and so forth. And he has also made many distorted statements, which are partly true, partly false, many exaggerated statements, for example, about the allegedly huge US economic boom, claiming that the economy supposedly is the strongest it has been for 50 years, despite the fact that the United States has added over $2 trillion to its national debt that was already horrendously enormous when President Trump took office in January 2017. Over $2 trillion during his presidency so far. Yes. And he claimed earlier that Cohen is a weak person who wants to get a shorter jail term. He claimed that Cohen lied a lot during his first day of testimony. The White House issued a statement that it is laughable that a convicted felon and liar Cohen should be taken at his word. But given the thousands of times Donald Trump has either lied or made misleading statements since he started his presidential campaign officially in July 2015, that statement sounds rather hypocritical. Can Donald Trump be taken at his word? It seems, at least according to these statistics, much or most of the time he can't, at least not fully. While I certainly am no fan of Donald Trump, I'm no fan of Michael Cohen either, although I feel somewhat greater sympathy towards him, at least compared to Donald Trump, while they both are liars in the sense that they have lied. At least compared to Donald Trump, he has shown or pretended to show more contrition, while I can't remember a single time when Donald Trump would have apologized publicly for his lies. At least Cohen has shown or pretended to show contrition and has even publicly apologized for those lies. At least he has nothing to lose, since he will end up in jail anyway. But if his testimony is factually found correct, especially regarding the alleged collusion between Trump and certain Russian agents before the 2016 US presidential elections, and especially if it could be proved that Trump had actually directly asked someone to lie to the United States Congress. He hadn't, according to Mr. Cohen's testimony, directly asked Cohen to lie, so it's a kind of borderline case then. But anyway, if he pressured or asked Cohen to tell less than the entire truth, that could remotely constitute grounds for either perjury or obstruction of justice in case the Democrats, congressional Democrats, wanted to press for Donald Trump's impeachment. But let's look at rather many newspapers, most of them US newspapers, and then there's that website, CNN, of course, for analyses of Mr. Cohen's first day of testimony. No copyright infringement, of course, intended. So let's look first at the Washington Post. Catherine Rampell. This article was published on February 28th, 2019, and cited under the section Opinions, or placed under that section. The biggest lesson from Michael Cohen's explosive testimony. To me, the biggest lesson was that we desperately need to increase the Internal Revenue Service's budget. Cohen, formerly President Trump's personal lawyer, repeatedly offered accounts of not only how comfortable Trump became with cheating Uncle Sam, but also how ill-equipped our tax cops were to catch him. According to Cohen, Trump directed him to hire a straw bidder to purchase a 9-foot painting of Trump at auction. The bidder was then reimbursed with tax-advantaged funds from the Trump Foundation. Cohen said Trump had similarly used foundation funds to buy other portraits of himself that now hang in his golf clubs, a pattern previously documented by my colleague David Farenthold. Cohen also spoke about arranging a service contract for Trump to speak at the Ukrainian-American Economic Forum. And the Ukraine is an Eastern European country bordering on Russia, by the way. At Trump's direction, Cohen said he had the $150,000 payment for these Skyped or Skyped-in remarks made to the Trump Foundation instead of to Trump directly. Further questioning from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, addressed a New York Times report about the Trump family's use of dubious or outright fraudulent schemes to duck taxes on Fred Trump's estate. And of course, Republicans hammered Cohen about Cohen's own tax misdeeds. As part of his plea agreement, in order to get a reduced sentence, Cohen pleaded guilty to tax fraud. Trump has said he has brilliantly used the tax laws to his advantage, but has repeatedly denied any law breaking. Many of Trump's and his associates' alleged attempts to evade the taxman were astoundingly brazen. That may partly just reflect who Trump is, but it may reflect Trump's accurate, in brackets, assessment of just how outgunned the taxman has begun. When asked why Trump was reluctant to release his tax returns, Cohen suggested that Trump feared that if anyone had the expertise and bandwidth to go through his tax filings, they'd probably find something fishy, meaning suspicious. What he didn't want was to have an entire group of think tanks that are tax experts run through his tax return and start ripping it to pieces, and then he'll end up in an audit and he'll ultimately have taxable consequences, penalties, and so on, Cohen explained. If true, that statement would undercut Trump's sorry excuse for not releasing his returns, that he was already under audit. And that should tell something about those Christian ministers of the gospel, including Reverend Franklin Graham and Reverend or Pastor Evangelist, I don't know what his official title is, Jerry Falwell Jr., who have stood by Trump at least until 2018. Over 1 year ago, in January 2018, under a tough and testy interview by video link with CNN's Don Lemon, Reverend Graham claimed that in his opinion, Trump is a changed man, and then used the generic explanation or excuse, we're all sinners, as if there wasn't a big difference between those sinners who at least try to sincerely and wholeheartedly follow Jesus Christ, including, I trust, Reverend Graham, and then those who just go through the motions of some outward Christian practices, like some church going, although according to at least a couple of his critics, Trump hardly attends church anymore. And as if there were not many ancient Jewish prophets who rebuked unrighteous kings of especially northern Israel and then also of Judah. But it would also reflect a grim reality. The Internal Revenue Service enforcement activity has indeed loosened over the years, especially when it comes to the ultra-wealthy. Mind you, Trump has for years already been, as far as his net worth is concerned, a billionaire. Since fiscal 2011, meaning October 2010 to September 2011, the audit rate for large corporations with at least $10 million in assets has halved. For households with income of more than $1 million, it has declined by 2/3, according to IRS data. Likewise, federal prosecutions referred by the IRS have plunged to their lowest level on record, according to data from Syracuse University's Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse. In fact, adjusted for population size, IRS referred prosecutions are just a quarter of their early 90s peak. Tax cheating by the wealthy is not costless. When they shirk, it just means law-abiding suckers, as known as Leona Helmsley's little people, have to pay more to make up for the shortfall. So why has enforcement fallen? Why have people such as Trump and Cohen, Paul Manafort, and others with major red flags been so confident that their taxes won't be scrutinized? It's not because the deep state, in quotation marks, wants to go easy on well-heeled tax cheats. It's that our policymakers, of course, by that she means cabinet secretaries and members of Congress, for example, have systematically hobbled the IRS. Congress has given the agency more responsibilities while simultaneously slashing its resources. IRS staffing for key enforcement occupations has shrunk by about 1/3 over the past 6 years. That's bad news if you care about fiscal responsibility, since IRS brings in several dollars for every dollar it spends. It's also bad news if you care about catching bad actors. And then to New York Times, this article also was published on February the 28th, 2018. Trump ordered officials to give Jared Kushner a security clearance. Okay. And Jared Kushner is President Trump's son-in-law, married to his daughter Ivanka, and senior advisor as well, who received a top-secret security clearance despite concerns from intelligence officials. So the photograph is by Saul Loeb, Agence France Presse, and Getty Images. The article was written by Maggie Haberman, Michael S. Schmidt, and Adam Goldman, and Annie Carney. President Trump ordered his chief of staff to grant his son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner a top-secret security clearance in 2018, overruling concerns flagged by intelligence officials and the White House's top lawyer. 4 people briefed on the matter said. President Trump's decision in May 2018 so troubled senior administration officials that at least one, then White House Chief of Staff, John F. Kelly, wrote a contemporaneous internal memo about how he had been ordered to give Mr. Kushner the top secret clearance. The White House counsel at the time, Donald F. McGahn II, also wrote an internal memo outlining the concerns that had been raised about Mr. Kushner, including by the CIA, and how Mr. McGahn had recommended that he not be given a top secret clearance. The disclosure of the memos contradicts statements made by the president, who told the New York Times in January 2019 in an Oval Office interview that he had no role in his son-in-law receiving his clearance. Asked on Thursday about the memos contradicting the president's account, Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, said, "We don't comment on security clearances." So, cutely sidestepping the issue. It is not known precisely what factors led to the problems with Mr. Kushner's security clearance. Officials had raised questions about his own and his family's real estate businesses' ties to foreign governments and investors, and about initially unreported contacts he had with foreigners. The issue also generated criticism of Mr. Trump for having two family members serve in official capacities in the West Wing. Mr. Kushner has spent this week abroad working on a Middle East peace plan. Among his meetings was one with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. During the 2016 presidential campaign, Mr. Kushner was among the members of the group who met a Russian lawyer who went to Trump Tower claiming to have political dirt on Hillary Clinton, as if the Trump team couldn't have received enough material to use in then Mr. Trump's campaign against Hillary Clinton from domestic, or meaning American sources. And during the presidential transition, Mr. Kushner had a meeting with the Russian ambassador at the time, Sergei Kislyak, and the head of a Russian state-owned bank. When he applied for a security clearance, he did not reveal those meetings. House Democrats are in the early stages of an investigation into how several Trump administration officials obtained clearances, including Mr. Kushner. And then another article by the New York Times published also on February the 28th, 2019, after Cohen testimony, top Democrats shy from impeachment, by Nicholas Fanders and Carl Hulse. Michael D. Cohen's explosive testimony this week about President Trump's potentially felonious conduct has not moved House Democratic leaders closer to initiating impeachment proceedings against the president, with top lawmakers preferring to pursue multiple intertwined inquiries as they await the results of the special counsel's investigation. Speaker Nancy Pelosi of California, who has steadfastly pushed back against calls to try to impeach Mr. Trump, told reporters that impeachment was a divisive issue in our country and that she was more concerned with the president's declaration of a national emergency at the southern border. It should be the last thing on members' minds, Representative Mike Quigley, an Illinois Democrat who sits on the Intelligence Committee, said about impeachment. You have to be patient and you have to be practical. You don't stop a criminal investigation when you have enough. You stop when you have learned everything there is to be learned. The resistance to impeachment puts the leadership at odds with some rank-and-file Democratic lawmakers, liberal activists, and a significant portion of Democratic voters who believe that sufficient evidence already exists to start the process of ousting the president. As House inquiries proceed, pressure will mount on Ms. Pelosi and other top Democrats to take action against Mr. Trump. But by fall 2019, with Democratic presidential hopefuls making the rounds in Iowa, the campaign to unseat the president will be well underway, and Democrats may decide they would rather face an embattled President Trump than a Mike Pence elevated to the presidency, however remote that possibility would be, because of course that would mean that something like 20 or 21 Senate Republicans would have to abandon the president, and all the Democrats would have to vote for his impeachment and removal from office. The impeachment of Bill Clinton came just after a midterm election back in 1998. Richard M. Nixon resigned more than 2 years before the next presidential election in August 1974 and was serving in his second term anyway. A full-blown impeachment inquiry carries special weight and symbolism and would be open the door to President Trump and Republicans saying he's being unfairly pursued by overreaching Democrats. That was exactly what Nixon and many of his defenders said during the Watergate affair, especially when it moved to the impeachment inquiry stage. And that was exactly, or largely at least, to correct my earlier statement, and that was just about exactly what, or largely, what former President Clinton said during the impeachment inquiry stage, or actually during the 13-month process that started from that explosive article by Matt Drudge about Clinton's extramarital affair with a young White House intern, Monica Lewinsky, although Lewinsky had already in the spring of 1996 moved to Pentagon, largely at the insistence of certain other White House employees who considered her somehow a risk because they feared that she would share confidential details of her interaction with the president with her friends, for example. And then Clinton's ardent defenders. So Nixon resigned, Clinton hung on, and he was able to turn, especially in January and early February 1999, the battle to remove him from office into a personal one. In other words, and he still maintained this in his autobiography, My Life, first published in 2004, that it wasn't that much about his moral failings, which he claimed to be sorry about, having the extramarital affair and lying about it to his wife even, and to the country. But it was about his ideas. He wanted a tolerant United States. I'm not quoting him exactly, but I'm basically capturing the gist of what he wrote in his autobiography, with shared sacrifices and benefits and equal rights, or something like that. And his Republican opponents and enemies basically hated those ideas and him personally, and wanted to ruin his presidency and his personal life. And of course, if Trump is able to make the case convincingly, should the House Democrats push for impeachment, then he may survive, although with a very tarnished reputation. Outside of leadership, other Democrats say impeachment of President Trump is practically inevitable as the inquiries proceed. And then Los Angeles Times: holster the toy cannons, people, cancel those refresher courses on the 25th Amendment. For all the fireworks, grubby details, and rageaholic outbursts at Michael Cohen's Capitol Hill public testimony on Wednesday, meaning February the 27th, 2019, it took just 11 short words from the felonious fixture's opening statement to ensure that our long national nightmare will not, in fact, soon end. Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. So Trump's defenders could claim that there's no hard case for perjury or obstruction of justice. However, if there is the implication that Trump would have preferred Cohen to lie, some kind of case could be made either for obstruction of justice or perjury. And of course, if hard evidence was found, an undoctored, unedited videotape, an undoctored, unedited audio tape, or then an undoctored, unedited note, slip of paper, letter, memo, memorandum, whatever, which would prove beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump indeed asked someone directly to lie under oath to Congress, then easily he could be impeached by the now Democratic-controlled US House of Representatives. What would happen in the still officially Republican-controlled US Senate is anybody's guess right now. So concludes last month's momentarily tantalizing notion, so in January 2019, originally reported by BuzzFeed, unprecedentedly disputed by the Office of Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III, or Mueller, that President Trump personally instructed his thuggish capo to perjure himself. Some in Mueller's carol-singing fan club had convinced themselves that his legalistic rebuttal of the story still left plenty of room for Cohen to deliver a knockout blow if he was ever allowed to testify in public. Then, to save time, USA Today. And the article, just a brief summary of it. Michael Cohen, President Trump's former personal lawyer and fixer, concluded 3 days of excruciating appearances before congressional committees on Thursday, with lawmakers saying they needed to meet again as they expand their investigation into the president. Lawmakers said they also plan to take testimony from Felix Sater, a Trump business partner who helped negotiate a potential Trump Tower project in Moscow that was the subject of Cohen's conviction for lying to Congress. The March the 6th session will also be closed, although Adam Schiff, a House Democrat, said he expected to release a transcript of Cohen's testimony once the Justice Department has an opportunity to review it. The panel scheduled an open hearing on March the 14th with Sater. Cohen delivered testimony behind closed doors on Tuesday, meaning February the 26th, to the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is investigating Russian interference in the 2016 election. And he testified in open session Wednesday, February the 27th, at the House Oversight and Reform Committee, delivering a searing rebuke of his former boss as a conman and cheat, and tying him directly to the criminal probes that have surrounded the president. And then the Chicago Tribune. Editorial: 2 tracks for Trump, Gambler and Scoundrel. Written by editorial board. Published on February the 28th, 2019. Which Donald Trump captivated your attention Thursday? The gambler who brashly tried but failed to reach a deal stripping North Korea of nuclear weapons, or the slippery scoundrel described as a conman and a criminal by his former lawyer? Both personas were on display as cable news operators spanning the globe covered Trump's scuttled summit meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un while chewing over Michael Cohen's congressional testimony. Part gambler, part scoundrel. Or maybe the mix you see is different depending on your political outlook. No presidents escape controversy. Their political decisions divide Americans as much as unite them, and this is partly due to the US presidential democracy, where the president is both the head of state and the head of government. There isn't even a nominal prime minister or chief of cabinet. That role is fulfilled or filled by the president. Of course, it depends on each individual president exactly how big a portion of his potentially huge powers he wants to use. And of course, it depends on each president's political image and personal abilities and so forth, to what extent he can dominate the Congress, and the judiciary. Especially the former. If the president is a conciliatory and moderate, likable leader, it is likely that he will get quite much done, that quite a large majority of his major legislative proposals or of his cabinet secretary's major legislative proposals will be approved by Congress without major watering down. The media will be fairly kind and polite to him, and especially if he seems to have a high personal morality, that will always be an asset. And he may easily end up serving 2 terms. But then if the president is someone like Donald Trump, a visibly arrogant person who doesn't often conceal his contempt of those people with whom he disagrees and whom he considers less intelligent or otherwise less talented than he is. And if he is divisive, not just to the country, but also to his party, then he can find himself at loggerheads, especially with the legislative branch of government, meaning the United States Congress. With Trump, we see a more fundamental, lamentable divide between the policy work he pursues and his character failings, just like we saw, or largely as we saw with Bill Clinton some 2 decades ago. That is, we see an unbridgeable contradiction between the go-for-broke presidency and the personally flawed president. 2 tracks were probably inevitable for Trump. He took office, meaning as president, back in January 2017, ill-prepared for the job and disinterested in taming his raging ego, which makes him vulnerable to repeating stupid mistakes. It doesn't mean he is incapable of achievements. It means he takes high-stakes risks like this North Korea gambit. Trump won office as a blunt-talking iconoclast, meaning someone who is against established values and institutions, which pleased his supporters, meaning his base. They were sick of politics as usual and sick of being patronized by arrogant snobs who know what's best for everyone. And Trump's the same helter-skelter better today. He trusts his gut. He knows what he wants to accomplish, but he doesn't know much about conventional governance or diplomacy. And in a disservice to his goals and his constituents, he refuses to moderate his impetuous behavior. As a result, Trump's time in the White House has been bedeviled by scandal and needless mistakes. Example, Trump's peculiar statement that he believes the North Korean dictator's claim that he didn't know about the mistreatment of American university student Otto Warmbier, because he was probably of German origin, who was imprisoned there in January 2016, and then he was beaten, or then he had an accident, an innocent accident in that North Korean prison. Whatever happened, he injured his head so badly that he became practically brain dead. In that condition, he was finally shipped to the United States, but he died shortly thereafter, while the now deceased American college student was imprisoned in his country. Cohen's appearance before a House committee was a different flavored reminder of the president's poor judgment. You don't have to take Cohen's word for it. He's shady in his own right. But there's enough corroborating evidence to recognize Cohen's assertion that Trump took office as the worst version of himself. Among the many scurrilous stories Cohen told publicly, he testified that Trump orchestrated payoffs to an adult film actress, meaning Stephanie Clifford, as known as Stormy Daniels, to hide a Trump affair. Cohen also testified that Trump pursued a real estate deal in Moscow and lied to the public about that as he marched toward the presidency. He lied about it because he never expected to win, Cohen said. Quite a surprising statement given Trump's big ego and seemingly limitless belief in his own abilities, or at least very high belief. He also lied about it because he stood to make hundreds of millions of dollars on the Moscow real estate project. Cohen has pleaded guilty to lying to a Senate subcommittee, bank fraud, tax fraud, and violating campaign finance laws. He will go to prison. The legal scrutiny of Trump continues. Special counsel Robert Mueller soon is expected to conclude the Russia investigation and determine, among other things, whether Trump obstructed justice by firing FBI Director James Comey. Some of the noise surrounding Trump is inevitable. His brash temperament makes him divisive and surprising. The three preceding more conventional presidents, meaning Bill Clinton, never mind that he had his own scandals, including impeachment, but not removal from office, George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and didn't aggressively try to stop Pyongyang from developing atomic bombs. Trump instead has risked success and failure by bringing the hermit kingdom into the world's limelight, meaning North Korea. How much of this week's walk of his theatrics, none of us knows. Trump may wind up with nothing more than what his predecessors unfortunately permitted, a North Korea with nuclear weapons and improved missile capabilities. Or perhaps by force of will, Trump eventually will achieve a breakthrough with Kim. Walking away from Kim rather than cutting a bad deal and claiming victory demonstrated, depending on your outlook, Trump's confident instinct or failed roadshow. Stage right, Chinese trade negotiators now know that if they don't make more concessions in tariff talks, America's unpredictable president would do the same to them. Yet, as Cohen reiterated, Trump also can be the scoundrel. The greatest threat to this presidency is the president. Well, much the same statement was implied by various critics of former President Bill Clinton, or then various critics of the late President Richard Nixon. Did Cohen move the needle? DallasNews.com. I am not protecting Trump anymore. Cohen calls president racist, conman, and cheat. Thursday news story. So published on February the 28th, 2019. I doubt that Wednesday's testimony by Michael Cohen moved the needle. From a legal standpoint, it probably won't provide prima facie evidence to place the president in jeopardy, meaning impeachment, even if a sitting president could be indicted. Trump's attorneys made sure his written answers to Robert Mueller left sufficient room to avoid perjury. Well, this brings to mind Bill Clinton's videotaped testimony to Kenneth Starr's grand jury back in August 1998. His public speech later that day to the American people, and of course, by extension, to much of the humankind through video links and the internet. While my answers were legally accurate, I did not volunteer information. And then he said that his statement, his deposition made either in December 1997 or January 1998, around the time when he last met Monica Lewinsky in person, in which he denied having had a sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky. Was that a completely false statement? Basically asked one of the grand jurors. Clinton smiled slightly, saying, well, that depends on what you think the meaning of is, because he claimed to have ended his extramarital affair with Monica Lewinsky already back in the spring of 1997. From a rhetorical perspective, I can't envision Cohen's testimony significantly reducing support for the president or causing Republicans in Congress suddenly to develop a spine. The country seems locked in, and the Trump and his public relations team for months have systematically undermined what Cohen and others might say. Wednesday's hearing is an essential part of government oversight, but the ongoing debate over Cohen, fueled by the media and political pundits, should not dominate the 2020 campaign, meaning presidential campaign. If it does, That will not help the Democrats put forward a unified message capable of persuading independents and open-minded Republicans, because of course you have to offer a positive alternative. You just can't win by attacking and criticizing if you offer nothing constructive and positive in return. Richard Cherwitz, Austin. Then CNN Politics, published on February the 28th, 2019. Michael Cohen was the center of attention on Wednesday in Washington, delivering a broad-scale takedown of President Donald Trump with the eyes of the country, or at least people who are glued to cable TV watching. But in a hearing as high-profile as Cohen's appearance before the House Oversight Committee, one of the most highly anticipated events on Capitol Hill in a generation, there were lots of other storylines and actors who stood out for reasons both good and bad. I watched all 6+ hours of the hearing, a patient person, I must say, then read back through the transcript, and I am now ready to declare some of the best and worst performances by members of Congress at Wednesday's Cohen hearing. Winners: Elijah Cummings. The Oversight Committee chairman had a very tall task: fairly oversee a hearing that was by its very nature deeply partisan. The Maryland Democrat performed that balancing act admirably as things stayed generally under control. One, he managed to de-conflict a fight between Representatives Mark Meadows, North Carolina, and Rashida Tlaib, a Democrat, Michigan, over allegations of racism. And two, his closing remarks were a heartfelt appeal to how politics can and should be that quickly went viral. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's very rare in a House committee hearing for people to pay much attention to the least senior members on the panel. While she has faced criticism fairly, in my mind, that she has said things without checking their veracity in her first few months in Congress, she was fact-based and incisive in her questions for Cohen on Wednesday. She zeroed in on the alleged treasure trove of catch-and-kill documents that AMI President David Pecker allegedly possesses, and on the idea that Trump may have devalued his assets to pay less in taxes. Asked about her successful questioning, AOC attributed to her background as a waitress and bartender. Forces you to get great at reading people and hones razor-sharp BS detector, she tweeted. Jim Jordan. The Ohio Republican spent many minutes working to undermine Cohen's testimony on Wednesday, partly or partially because plenty of GOP committee members turned their extra questioning time over to the ranking member, which honestly played directly into Jordan's strengths. He's not in the business of getting positive reviews from the blue check marks on Twitter. He's in the business of showing conservatives, the Fox News crowd, and most importantly, President Donald Trump, that he's a fighter for their values. Jordan's smirking disdain for Cohen killed among his target audience. Katie Hill / Harley Rauda. These two freshman Democrats didn't get to ask questions until the hearing was already hours old, but they each stood out from their more senior colleagues in the effectiveness of what they asked. Ruda's questions on Felix Sater and Trump's relationship with him shed light on a piece of the broader story that we didn't know much about before. Hill drilled down on just how involved Trump was on the in and outs of the payout to porn star Stormy Daniels. The answer was very involved. Justin Amash. The Michigan Republican did something on Wednesday that almost none of his GOP colleagues seemed willing to even try. Asked Cohen questions about his relationship with Trump that might actually shed some new light on not only their relationship, but on the President of the United States. Amash got Cohen to explain his contention that Trump might never have asked associates to directly lie, but that the president spoke in a code, quotation marks, that made his intentions clear. And Amash asked Cohen one of my favorite questions of the entire hearing, which Cohen did not answer. What's the truth that Trump fears most? Losers. Mark Meadows, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, was out for blood in the hearing. He could barely contain his anger and contempt for Cohen every time he spoke. The stunt of bringing Lynn Patton, a longtime African-American employee of the Trump organization and now a member of the administration, to stand behind him as a prop to prove that Trump isn't racist was a very, very bad idea. At Meadows' victory lap, when he seemed to catch Cohen making a filing error in regard to foreign clients, was a little overdone. Okay, a lot overdone. Given that the president's son-in-law, who also happens to be one of the most influential advisors in the White House, has had his fair share of disclosure issues. Clay Higgins, the Louisiana congressman, seemed to think he had a hit on a major breakthrough when Cohen talked about finding a copy of a $35,000 check from Trump while going through boxes of documents and records. Are these not boxes that should have been turned over to investigative authorities during the many criminal investigations you've been subject to? Higgins asked Cohen in his best true detective voice. Cohen made clear that the boxes had been seized by federal authorities when they raided his house in April 2017 and had been subsequently returned to him. Higgins seemed unswayed by the fact, following up with this: if they included data pertinent to crimes that you've committed, should they not have been turned over and remanded to investigate authority? Rashida Tlaib. Tlaib was one of the last persons to ask questions of Cohen in the hearing, but she didn't really ask Cohen anything, instead choosing to blast Meadows for what she considered the racist act of using Patton as a prop to show that Trump couldn't possibly be racist. Meadows went crazy, demanding that Tlaib's words be taken down, which is an actual punishment in the House, and insisting that Cummings, with whom his close friends, defend him from allegations of racism. Paul Gosar / Bob Gibbs. Both Gosar of Arizona and Gibbs of Ohio seemed either woefully unprepared for the questioning, overwhelmed by the moment, or both. Matt Gaetz. When the Florida Republicans strolled into the hearing room on Wednesday morning, I quickly pulled up a list of the members of the Oversight Committee and confirmed that Gaetz wasn't on it. So why was he there? To hear Gaetz tell it. He wanted to observe Cohen's testimony and hoped that he might get to ask a few questions. Okay. Then the Sydney Morning Herald, racist conman cheat former fixer Cohen unloads on Trump before Congress, published on February the 28th, 2019 by Matthew Knott. Very few things. Cohen said he had no direct evidence that Trump or his campaign had colluded with Russia during the 2016 election. Cohen, who served as Trump's fixer and confidant for more than a decade, has been sentenced to 3 years in prison after admitting to committing campaign finance violations and lying to Congress about Trump's plans to build an enormous tower in Moscow. Cohen said he was mesmerized by Trump and was lured into doing things that he knew were absolutely wrong. I'm ashamed that I chose to take part in concealing Mr. Trump's illicit acts rather than listening to my own conscience, Cohen said in an opening statement to the committee. I'm ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He's a racist, he's a conman, he's a cheat. Aware of his dubious credibility, Cohen brought copies of checks, financial statements, and letters with him to buttress his testimony. According to Cohen, Trump's longtime advisor Roger Stone, who recently was arrested and then released on bail, told Trump in July 2016, so 1 year after Trump had announced his presidential candidacy, that he had spoken to WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and that the site would soon publish hacked emails that would damage Clinton's campaign. Wouldn't that be great? Trump replied, according to Cohen. Soon after the conversation, WikiLeaks published a trove of hacked emails that embarrassed Clinton's campaign and forced the resignation of the Democratic National Committee chairwoman. Stone, who faces jail time for lying to the FBI, has denied giving Trump advance warning about the WikiLeaks release, as has Trump. Cohen said he also believes that Trump was aware of a now infamous 2016 meeting between his son, Donald Trump Jr., his campaign chief, Paul Manafort, who also faces a jail term, and actually a lengthy one, and a Russian lawyer with connections to the Kremlin. But Cohen also undercut one of the most discussed political stories of the year, a BuzzFeed report that Trump instructed Cohen to lie to Congress about his business dealings in Russia, by claiming that he didn't directly tell Cohen to lie to Congress. And he added, that's not how he operates. Cohen did say that Trump had implicitly directed him to lie about plans to build a Trump Tower in Moscow by saying privately that he had no business interests in Russia, despite both men knowing that was untrue. And then concludes this journalist. Cohen said Trump had instructed him to handle negative press about his widely disbelieved claim he didn't serve in the Vietnam War because he had bone spurs. You think I'm stupid? I wasn't going to Vietnam, Cohen said Trump told him. Although Trump once demanded Obama release his test scores, Cohen said Trump also directed him to threaten his high school and colleges with civil action if they released his grades or standardized test scores without Trump's permission. And BBC, 5 things that Michael Cohen said about Donald Trump, published on February the 27th, 2019. Okay, it's actual video, sorry. The New Zealand Herald. 4 key takeaways from Michael Cohen's testimony, published on February the 28th, 2019 by Chad Day, Stephen Brown, and Michael Balsamo. Michael Cohen told Congress a lot, and much of it wasn't good for Donald Trump. In matter-of-fact testimony, the former Trump lawyer drew a troubling picture of his former boss, implicating the US president in lies big and small to the American public. But Cohen stopped short of saying he had direct evidence that Trump or his campaign conspired with the Kremlin to sway the 2016 US presidential election. Here are a few key takeaways. 1, Trump spoke in code, at least when it came to covering up a business deal in Russia. 2, no direct evidence of collusion, although Cohen says he does have suspicions about it. 3, there's more to come. Cohen says prosecutors in New York are investigating conversations that Trump or his advisors had with Cohen after the FBI raided his hotel room and office in April 2018. About 2 months later, so in or around June 2018, Cohen says he had contact with Trump or one of his representatives. But Cohen declined to say more because he says the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York is investigating the matter. 4, entangling the Trump children. Cohen said he had briefed Ivanka Trump, Trump's daughter, and Donald Trump Jr., one of his sons, approximately 10 times about the business deal to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. Cohen's testimony may pose a problem for Trump Jr., who told Congress in 2017 that he was only peripherally aware of the proposal. During the testimony, Trump Jr. ridiculed Cohen as a disgruntled former employee who was just out to save himself, Trump Jr. tweeted that Cohen's testimony sounded like a breakup letter. Both he and his brother, Eric Trump, suggested that Cohen was angry because he was rejected from a job at the White House, an assertion Cohen denied. Eric Trump also tweeted a Republican Party video about Cohen with the title, "Have Fun in Prison."